The desert sun had barely begun to rise over the sleepy town of Dry Creek, but already a crowd was forming in the dusty square. Women in bonnets and men in wide-brimmed hats jostled for a view of the gallows being erected on the wooden platform. Outside the jail, children were told to stay back, but most peeked out from behind skirts or sat atop their fathers' shoulders. This was a spectacle, a hanging at dawn. And not just any hanging. It was for Evelyn Hart, 20-3 years old. And the talk of the territory, Evelyn was a puzzle to most of Dry Creek. Some said she was a killer. Others whispered that she'd once been married to an outlaw or maybe had murdered a man in cold blood during a poker game. Truth was, no one really knew. But gossip didn't need truth to grow wild like prairie fire. She sat in her cell, hands cuffed in front of her, ankles chained to the iron leg of the cot. Her once elegant dress was torn and stained with dust. She had a bruise on her cheek and dried blood on her lip from the last time the sheriff questioned her. But her back remained straight, her head held high. Her green eyes stared through the bars at the gallows, but she didn't flinch. She didn't beg. There was a strange calm about her. Deputy Marvin Clay, who was barely old enough to grow a full beard, approached the cell with a tin cup of water and half a stale biscuit. "You, want anything for your last request?" he mumbled. Evelyn didn't answer immediately. She tilted her head as if listening to something far away. "Yes," she said softly. "I'd like you to tell the sheriff I'd like to be married before I hang." Clay blinked. "Married?" "To Jesse Thorne," she said. "Tell him that." The deputy nearly dropped the cup. You mean that Jesse Thorne? The outlaw?" Evelyn smiled, just faintly. "Is there another?" Clay rushed out in confusion, but she didn't watch him leave. Her gaze returned to the horizon where the desert stretched in every direction. She was listening again, waiting. Outside, the tension crackled like heat off the dry earth. The sheriff barked orders to the men building the gallows. His name was Reuben Harker, a proud and mean-spirited man with a hatred for lawbreakers and women who didn't know their place. To him, Evelyn wasn't a mystery. She was guilty. She'd shot his son in the chest in broad daylight. An ungrateful witch, he told anyone who would listen. My boy took her in, gave her a home, and she murdered him. No one asked what kind of home his son had given her. No one dared. Evelyn's trial had been over before it began. She had no lawyer, no defense. A jury of local men found her guilty in minutes. A woman alone, no family, and accused of killing the sheriff's kin, she didn't stand a chance. And now, the town waited to see justice served. But while everyone's attention was fixed on the gallows, no one noticed the lone rider moving silently across the ridge west of town. Dressed in black, with a low-brimmed hat and a long coat that trailed like a shadow, Jesse Thorne looked more myth than man. A Colt .45 rested at his hip, and his boots were caked in the red dust of the desert. Wanted posters with his face had hung in saloons and post offices for years. Dead or alive, $10,000 reward. He was a ghost in most folks' eyes. A killer. A legend. And he was coming for Evelyn Hart. Back in her cell, Evelyn reached beneath her torn skirt and pulled out a small silver ring. Her fingers trembled slightly, but her face remained hard. She whispered, "You better ride fast, Jesse. You're almost out of time." She hadn't seen him in 3 years, not since that night on the riverbank when he'd ridden off to keep her safe. He said he'd return. He hadn't, not until now. The crowd outside swelled. The sun burned orange above the mountains. The preacher arrived, Bible in hand. The executioner adjusted the rope, pulling it tight. Deputy Clay returned to her cell and unlocked the door, unable to meet her eyes. "It's time." She stood, straightened her dress, and stepped forward. Chains clanked with every movement. "Miss Hart," the deputy said nervously, "why'd you ask for Jesse Thorne?" She looked him straight in the eye. "Because he's the only man who ever saw me as more than something to break." Then she walked out into the square, where her noose and her fate waited. And far off, beneath the rising sun, Jesse Thorne spurred his horse forward faster than death, faster than time. The desert wind kicked up dust as the sun climbed higher in the sky, painting the hills in gold and blood. On a worn, black-coated stallion rode a man as infamous as the land was. Dry. Jesse Thorne, wanted in 5 territories, the last man you ever wanted to see coming, unless you were Evelyn Hart. He rode without rest, pushing his horse harder than wise. His boots were dusty, his coat heavy with sweat, but his eyes were sharp-focused. He'd been tracking every whisper, every rumor, and when word reached him that Evelyn was to be hanged in Dry Creek, something inside him snapped. He hadn't spoken her name aloud in years, hadn't allowed himself to remember her voice, the way she used to challenge him with that fire in her eyes. But now, her name was all he could think of. Evelyn. Evie. The girl with a bullet in her soul and a spine made of steel. She'd saved him once, from the law, from himself. Now it was his turn. He rode through the night, changing horses at outlaw camps and bribing old contacts for directions. He crossed burned canyons, dry riverbeds, and outlaw-haunted ridges with one thought: he would not let her die. At a watering hole outside Dry Creek, Jesse stopped for just a moment to let his horse breathe. He leaned against a rock, the weight of years and regret pressing against him harder than the saddle ever had. A man nearby, tall and slick with a toothy grin, recognized him. "Thorne," the man said. "Didn't think you were still alive. Didn't think you'd still be breathing if I ever saw you again." Jesse replied. It was Bo Langley, a bounty hunter who once tried to sell Jesse out to a marshal near Tucson. That had ended with Jesse putting a bullet through Langley's thigh and swearing next time it'd be his head. "You looking for that girl?" Langley asked, sipping from a dented flask. "Whole town's talking. Hung in her at dawn. Pretty little thing. Shame." Jesse stepped forward, slow and deliberate. His voice was low. "You know where they're holding her?" Langley grinned. "What's it worth to ya?" Jesse didn't answer with words. He slammed the man into the side of the rock and pressed the cold iron of his revolver into Langley's jaw. "I'm not bartering for her life." Langley gagged and coughed. "Jailhouse, center of town. Sheriff Harker's got her under lock and key. Gallows are all ready." "Built." Jesse stepped back. "Don't follow me, Langley. If you ride after me or warn them, you'll never make it out of Dry Creek." Langley nodded, wide-eyed. Jesse mounted again and spurred his stallion hard, leaving behind a cloud of dust and a half-terrified man who had just remembered why the West feared Jesse Thorne. Meanwhile, in Dry Creek, the townspeople were beginning to grow restless. Some were setting up chairs, even selling lemonade and bread. The gallows had become a cruel kind of festival. But others, particularly the preacher and a few women, watched the whole thing with unease. "I don't know if she's innocent," whispered Mrs. Wendell, the midwife. "But something about this don't feel right. It's not right at all," murmured the preacher. "But the law's been decided." The sheriff made sure of that. Inside the jailhouse, Sheriff Reuben Harker watched the square from behind his desk. His jaw clenched tight and his knuckles were white. He told himself this was justice, that Evelyn deserved to hang for killing his son. But there was doubt deep down, he felt it. And worse, he feared something else entirely. He feared Jesse. Thorne might actually come. The sheriff had heard the stories how Jesse took down 4 Pinkerton agents in a single night, how he once freed a prisoner from a train by derailing it himself. And worst of all, how close he'd once been to Evelyn. He called his deputies. "Keep rifles ready. If Thorne shows, shoot to kill. No questions. He comes for her, we end them both." But Evelyn didn't seem afraid as she sat chained, waiting. For the dawn, she smiled slightly when she heard a distant sound, the faint rhythm of hooves. It was still too far to know for sure, but she felt it in her chest. He was coming. They'd loved once, fast and reckless. But Jessie had left, telling her she'd never be safe with him. He chose the road, and she chose survival. But fate had other plans. The law turned on her, and no one spoke for her except now. If he was still Jesse Thorne, the man who once told her no law could stop love, then he'd come back to keep his word. And as the sun rose higher over the hills, casting its golden light, down on the gallows, Jesse Thorne crested the ridge. Black coat, silver gun, fury in his eyes. He was no ghost now. He was real, and he was riding straight into the fire for her. The town clock struck 5. Just 1 hour remained until the noose would tighten around Evelyn Hart's neck. The square was now nearly full. Folks from nearby ranches and outlying settlements had arrived through the night, drawn by the promise of spectacle. Hanging days didn't come often, and hanging a woman? That was something the West hadn't seen in a long time. Curiosity and bloodlust mixed in the air like the scent of gunpowder before a duel. Children sat on barrels. Men smoked and placed bets, and women whispered behind fans. Above them all loomed the gallows, wooden, creaking, and cold. Sheriff Reuben. Harker stood near the platform, his eyes scanning the dusty road for trouble. He hadn't slept all night. He paced more than a man certain of his righteousness ought to. His jaw twitched. His hand never strayed far from the holster on his hip. "You're jumpy, boss," said Deputy Clay, wiping sweat from his brow. The sheriff glared. "I don't like surprises. And if Jesse Thorne's out there, he ain't coming to watch." The deputy swallowed hard. "You think he'd really try something? This many people? This much law?" Harker didn't answer. He didn't have to. The name Jesse Thorne didn't belong to a man anymore, it belonged to a legend. And legends didn't follow rules. Inside the jailhouse, Evelyn sat quietly, her wrists still bound, ankles chained, but her spine straight and her chin high. The preacher stood beside her now, offering a prayer she didn't listen to. Her eyes were on the window. On the dim light pushing over the mountains, she could feel him. Closer. Every heartbeat felt like thunder in her chest. She remembered when Jesse used to call her Evia girl, how he'd steal sips from her whiskey and say, "You've got a fire in you, woman so hot it could burn the whole damn West." She'd laugh then, thinking it was just sweet talk. But now? That fire was the only thing keeping her alive. The preacher closed his Bible. "Miss Hart, is there anything you'd like to say before the time comes?" She looked at him and, surprisingly, smiled. "Yeah, you better stay close to that good book, preacher. Things are about to get real damn messy out there." Outside town, just past the ridge, Jesse Thorne had dismounted. His stallion stood lathered in sweat, nostrils flaring. Jesse stood still in the brush, watching Dry Creek with a calm that would have unnerved any sane man. In one hand he held a spyglass watching the gallows being prepared. In the other, a matchstick he rolled between his fingers. He'd seen the crowd, counted the deputies, spotted the riflemen on rooftops, but it didn't matter. He wasn't riding in to die. He was riding in to take Evia out, and he knew exactly how. Behind him, a dust-covered man, appeared Cal Becker, a former outlaw and Jesse's oldest friend, scar on his cheek. "Shotgun in hand. You sure about this?" Cal asked. "They'll shoot you full of holes before you hit Main Street." Jesse didn't look away from the glass. "Then I'll ride through them like a ghost and take her anyway." "You're crazy. She's worth it," Cal smirked. "You always were a fool for redheads." Jesse snapped the spyglass shut and shoved it in his coat. "Get to the back. Alley like we planned. If I draw them out front, you grab her." "No hesitation," Cal nodded. What if they kill you? Jesse paused. Then ride hard and don't stop until she's safe. Back in town, Sheriff Harker was growing more nervous. By the minute, something didn't feel right. The air was too still. The tension too thick. Go check the West Ridge, he ordered. Now. But it was already too late. The church bell rang 6 times. The crowd hushed. A rider burst through the far end of Main Street like a lightning bolt. Black stallion. Black coat, silver gun. Gasps rippled through the crowd. It's him. Someone cried. It's Jesse Thorne. The sheriff spun. Shoot him. Now gunshots rang out from rooftops and behind barrels. But Jesse moved faster than death, as they used to say. His horse tore through the crowd, knocking men aside. Bullets whizzed past him, but he didn't slow. Not once. The gallows was in sight. The preacher grabbed Evelyn's hand, stunned. That's him? She just grinned. Told you things would get messy. Jesse's horse reared in front of the gallows. His revolver cracked 3 times. 3 deputies dropped to the ground. The crowd scattered in panic. People screamed. The preacher ducked. Sheriff Harker raised his rifle to fire, but Jesse beat him to it. Crack. The sheriff's hat flew from his head as Jesse's bullet grazed his scalp. The older man stumbled, blood pouring down one side of his face. Jesse jumped off his horse and strode up the steps of the gallows. He didn't look at the rope. He looked at Evelyn. Miss me? He asked. Her eyes burned. You're late. He turned to the crowd, raised his pistol in the air, and shouted, I claim this woman as my bride, and I dare any man to stop me. And the town of Dry Creek, once ready to hang a woman, stood frozen, watching history be rewritten by the barrel of a gun and the vow of an outlaw. The gallows creaked under Jesse Thorne's boots as he stood tall beside the woman he hadn't seen in 3 long, brutal years. His black coat fluttered slightly in the breeze, smoke curling from the barrel of his pistol as the last of the crowd's screams faded into stunned silence. Below, the square was chaos, men dragging wounded deputies away, women crying, and the townspeople too terrified to run or move. They weren't sure if they were witnessing a rescue or a siege. All they knew was this: the most feared outlaw in the West had just stopped a hanging, and now he was claiming the condemned woman as his bride. Jesse. Evelyn whispered, breathless, stunned. You shouldn't have come. He holstered his weapon and turned to her, his voice low and uncheckable. I told you once, Evie girl, no law written by man would keep me from you. Her chains clanked as she stepped forward. For the first time in weeks, she looked alive. Not just surviving, but burning. You came to die? She asked. No, he replied, pulling a silver band from his coat pocket. I came to marry you. Gasps erupted from those still nearby. Jesse turned toward the stunned preacher, who was crouched at the edge of the gallows, clutching his Bible, as if it were a shield. You're going to say the words, Jesse said. Now. The preacher hesitated, glancing toward the wounded sheriff, Reuben Harker, still dazed and bleeding from a grazing shot to the head. This ain't right, the preacher stammered. You can't just. I invoke the right under Texas territory law. Jesse interrupted, loud enough for everyone to hear. If a man marries a condemned woman, her sentence is delayed pending trial under spousal appeal. It's old, but it's still the law. Several folks in the crowd murmured in recognition. It was true a rarely used legal loophole, but existed, especially in remote frontier towns where trials often lacked lawyers or judges. It was created to prevent rushed executions when a spouse might hold evidence or request a retrial. And Jesse was banking everything on it. Sheriff Harker tried to stand, eyes wild. He's bluffing. Jesse pointed the gun at him again. One more word and you'll be speaking it in hell. The preacher looked between Jesse and Evelyn. His hands trembled. Miss Hart? Do you accept? Evelyn, still chained, met Jesse's eyes. You sure about this? He nodded. Then, through bloody lips and shackled limbs, she said the words, Yes, I do. The preacher began to speak. By the power vested in me under the laws of this territory. A shot cracked in the distance. The crowd ducked. Jesse spun, weapon raised. A new group of riders galloped into town. Posse reinforcements, likely summoned by Harker before the hanging began. 6 men, all armed, all mean-looking. And they weren't here for legal debates. They were here for blood. Keep reading. Jesse barked. I pronounce you man and wife. The preacher shouted in panic. Before the echo of his words died, Jesse grabbed Evelyn by the waist and pulled her behind him. He raised both pistols and fired off 3 shots in succession, taking down one of the incoming riders before they fully cleared the saloon. The gallows platform splintered under enemy fire. Bullets zipped past, striking posts, the bell tower. Barrels nearby. Can you run? Jesse asked. Evelyn held up her shackled wrists. I can try. Jesse shot through the chains binding her feet. Then run now. They leapt off the back of the gallows as the square erupted into a full gunfight. Jesse shoved Evelyn behind barrels and returned fire while townsfolk screamed and scattered like kicked-up hornets. Deputy Clay was caught in the crossfire and dove for cover. Jesse's friend Cal Becker, waiting just down the alley behind the jailhouse, saw them emerge and kicked his horse into gear. Evia! He shouted, Come on. Jesse lifted her into Cal's arms, shoving the ring into her hand. Go, Jesse said. I'll cover you. What about you? She yelled, clinging to the saddle. I'll find you, he promised. She didn't want to leave, but she knew what Jesse was doing. He was buying time. She'd seen that look before, back when he held off bounty hunters just long enough for her to escape once before. Cal's horse thundered down the alley, Evelyn clutching the reins with chained hands, heart pounding. Jesse turned and faced the Fang. Square again. 3 men approached, guns ready. He shot 2 before they took a step closer. The third dropped his weapon and ran. As the dust settled, Jesse sprinted toward the edge of town, bullets still flying overhead. Behind him, Evelyn vanished into the desert. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. They were married now. And anyone who tried to take her again would meet the outlaw the West feared most. The desert wind stung Evelyn's cheeks as she clung to the saddle behind Cal Becker, her hands still bound by broken shackles. Her wedding dress, such as it was nothing more than a torn, soot-streaked prison shift fluttering behind her like a war flag. Gunfire still echoed faintly behind them as Dry Creek disappeared in the distance. Swallowed by dust and chaos. Her heart pounded in rhythm with the gallop. Not just from fear, but from something else entirely. She was alive, she was free, and she was married to the deadliest outlaw west of the Rio Grande. A few miles out, Cal slowed his horse near a jagged ridge and dismounted, helping Evelyn down gently. She winced as her bare feet hit the rough ground, but she didn't complain. She just looked back toward the smoke trail rising from town and whispered, Jesse, he'll find us, Cal said gruffly. He always does. Evelyn looked at him, her green eyes piercing. You were part of this plan? Cal gave a slight nod. He told me a month ago he'd been hearing rumors about your arrest. Said he couldn't sleep at night thinking about what might happen to you. She laughed under her breath, a bitter sound. So he waited 3 years then? Showed up at my hanging with a ring? He's Jesse Thorne, Cal said with a shrug. He's not exactly a man of well-thought-out timing. But he meant it, Evia. She looked down at the ring in her hand. It was silver simple, worn but familiar. She had seen it once, years ago, in Jesse's saddlebags. He told her then, when this life slows down, I'll put that on your finger. I swear it. He hadn't gotten the chance. Until now. By nightfall. Cal had built a small fire near a canyon wall and caught a jackrabbit for dinner. Evelyn sat silently, warming her hands and trying to wrap her mind around what had just happened. It still felt unreal. The gallows, the gunfire, the vow dot, and the kiss they never had time to share. Why didn't he kiss me? She murmured aloud. Cal raised an eyebrow. He just shot his way through an entire town to marry you. Maybe he figured he'd earned it later. She chuckled softly. Or maybe he thought I'd slap him. You might have. Damn right I might have. It was past midnight when the soft sound of hooves reached their ears. Evelyn stood instantly, her pulse skipping. Jesse appeared out of the shadows like a ghost coat torn, blood on his arm, but alive. His black stallion limped slightly, but the man atop it was still impossibly steady. He dismounted without a word. Evelyn walked up to him, eyes searching his face for answers. Are you shot? Just a graze, Sheriff. He won't be chasing anyone for a while. She reached out, touching his jaw. You're insane. I told you I would come. You married me, she whispered. In front of the whole damn town. He pulled a silver ring from his pocket, the one she hadn't had time to wear, and knelt before her by the fire. I didn't just ride in to stop your hanging, he said. I rode in because I've spent 3 years regretting not giving. You my name, my life, everything. Jesse. He looked up at her, eyes fierce and honest. I meant every word. Have you heart? Will you still have me? She didn't hesitate this time. She held out her hand, and he slid the ring onto her finger, where it had always belonged. Then she pulled him to his feet, and this time they kissed, not like fugitives, not like outlaws, but like a husband and wife bound not by law but by survival, by war, by love. Far off in Dry Creek, Sheriff Harker nursed his wound and swore vengeance, and back in the canyon, as dawn crept across the horizon, the most wanted man in the West held his bride in his arms, knowing full well that the real fight, their freedom, their future was only just beginning. They rode through the desert night in silence, the moon a pale eye watching from above. Jesse took the lead, his stallion limping but steady, while Evelyn, now riding with Cal, clutched the reins with one hand and her side with the other. Her back ached, her wrists were raw from the broken shackles, and every jolt of the saddle reminded her that her body had been prepared to die, not flee. But her soul? Her soul was burning with life. Married. Escaped. Alive. And wanted by the law in every direction. By morning, they reached an abandoned line shack deep in the canyon country miles from any known trail. Jesse had stashed supplies there months ago, just in case. Water, salted meat, ammo, a spare rifle. Everything a man on the run might need. Evelyn stumbled off the horse and nearly collapsed, but Jesse caught her. You all right? He asked, his voice low. I've had worse, she muttered. You forget who you married? He grinned, brushing a strand of red hair from her face. Trust me, I remember. Inside the shack, she sat on an old cot while Jesse tended to the shallow bullet graze on his arm. She watched him with narrowed eyes. You got yourself shot to save me. Wasn't the first time. She tilted her head. Won't be the last either, will it? Jesse glanced at her, a quiet shadow behind his smile. Not if Harker has anything to say about it. Back in Dry Creek, Sheriff Reuben Harker was doing exactly what Jesse feared. With a bandage wrapped around his head and vengeance burning in his gut, he met with U.S. Marshals by midday, demanding a federal manhunt. She was sentenced. Convicted, he barked. That outlaw walked into my town, shot my men, and stole a prisoner under the cover of some marriage law loophole. I want them both hanging side by side next time. The lead marshal nodded. If she's married to Thorne, then she's just as wanted as he is now. Wanted posters were reprinted by sundown. Jesse Thorne and Evelyn Hart, married, armed, dangerous. Reward, $12,000, dead or alive. Back in the shack, Jesse sat beside Evelyn on the cot, his coat wrapped around her shoulders. For the first time in days, they were still. He looked over at her ring, the silver one he'd carried for years, waiting for the right moment. "I should have done this sooner," he said quietly. "You left for a reason," she replied. "You thought staying away kept me safe." "I was wrong." She looked at him, eyes soft but fierce. "You were trying to protect me. You just didn't know I don't need protecting. I needed you." He took her hand and kissed it. "You've got more grit than half the men I've ever known." "Flattery from an outlaw?" she said with a smirk. "Be still, my heart." Jesse chuckled, but the laughter didn't last long. "There's something else," he said, serious now. "Harker's not just after us because of his son. He's covering something up." Evelyn's eyes narrowed. "You think he knows the truth? I'd bet my life on it." Jesse pulled a folded piece of parchment from his coat, something he'd recovered from the sheriff's office during the chaos. A letter, sealed and YLLOED. Evelyn recognized the handwriting instantly. That's from the sheriff's son," she whispered. "To his father," Jesse nodded. "Confessing what he did to you. The threats, the bribes, everything. The old bastard had it hidden in his desk the whole time." Evelyn's breath caught. "I could have been free," she said, anger rising in her chest. "And he hid it to protect his son's name." Jesse clenched his jaw. "Now it's our weapon, but it wouldn't be easy. The law wanted them dead. Harker would hunt them to the ends of the territory, and any town that saw their faces would likely sell them out for the reward. Still, they had something now. Truth. Proof. And each other." Jesse leaned back against the rough wooden wall. "We lay low here a day or two, then head east. There's a liar in Silver Basin, one of the few men I trust. We get that letter in his hands, and we bury Harker for good." Evelyn gave a slow nod. "And then?" "Then we disappear. New names, new lives. Somewhere they'll never find us." She raised an eyebrow. "You really think they'll stop looking?" He smiled, that familiar crook smile. "They can chase me to hell, but no one has taken my wife from me again." As the sun set over the canyon, casting golden light across the red cliffs, Evelyn curled beside Jesse, her head on his shoulder, hand resting over his heart. She was no longer the girl in chains. She was a bride on the run, carrying the truth like a dagger and the love of a gunslinger like a shield. And together they were riding toward justice on their terms. The wind howled through the canyon like a warning. By dawn, Jesse Thorne was already up, watching the horizon from the ridge above the shack, rifle slung across his back. His jaw was tight, his eyes scanning every shadow. Below him, the fire had gone cold. Evelyn still slept, curled in his coat, her red hair messy but her breathing steady. She looked at peace for the first time since Dry Creek tried to kill her, but Jesse knew peace was an illusion. Blood always followed a name like his. By mid-morning, Evelyn joined him on the ridge, carrying a dented tin mug of coffee. She handed it to him silently and leaned against a boulder, the silver wedding ring catching the sunlight. "They'll be coming soon," she said. "Already are," Jesse muttered, pointing out faint tracks in the dust far below. "Riders, 3 or 4. Too far to tell if it's bounty hunters or marshals." Evelyn sipped her coffee. "Doesn't matter which. They'll all kill us just the same." He nodded. "Maybe we should ride straight for Silver Basin," she said. "Get that letter into the lawyer's hands before we get cornered." Jesse paused. "There's a problem." She looked at him. "I know at least 2 of the men working for Harker," he said. "One of them Silas Ridge. He ain't in it for the law. He's a gun for hire with a grudge. And he knows how I think. He's probably figured out our next move." Evelyn stiffened. You mean we're being hunted by someone worse than Harker? Silas doesn't care about justice. He wants to drag me in by the neck and collect every dime, if he finds you with me. She met his gaze. Then we kill him first. A silence fell between them, broken only by the wind. Later that day, as they packed supplies and prepared to move camp, Evelyn hesitated near Jesse's saddlebags. She reached into a side pouch, pulling out a folded newspaper clipping. It was old, faded, but still legible. Wanted, Evelyn Hart, reward $3,000. Murder in cold blood. She stared at her own face. He really made me into a monster, she said, her voice low. Harker. Jesse approached. They only print what the powerful pay them, too. She folded it up slowly. I never told you what really happened that day. With the sheriff's son, you don't have to. I do. She sat on a flat rock and began, her voice dry but steady. I worked for the Hartley's wealthy ranchers. Harker's son, Nathan, used to come around when the rancher was gone. Always too friendly, always looking at me like I was meat. Jesse's fists clenched. One night, he cornered me in the barn, locked the door, said no one would believe me if I screamed. He said his father owned the law. He was right. She looked away. I had a pistol in my apron. I told him no twice. The third time, I pulled the trigger. Jesse sat beside her slowly, his hand resting on hers. I didn't run at first, she said. I waited for them to listen. But they came for me with ropes, not justice. He said nothing, because there was nothing he could say that would make it right. But his silence said everything. He believed her. And he would burn every inch of this land before he let anyone lay another finger on her. That night, they moved east, riding beneath the cover of darkness. Cal Becker had left to scout the next ridge and set up a false trail, buying them time. Jesse and Evelyn rode in silence, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was a silence of shared scars. But just past midnight, as they crossed an old creek bed, Evelyn's horse spooked ears flat, muscles tensed. Jesse dismounted in an instant, drawing his revolver. Then a voice rang out from the darkness. Well, ain't this sweet? A man stepped forward from the rocks, long coat trailing behind him, a crooked grin on his face and a sawed-off shotgun resting on his shoulder. Silas Ridge. I was hoping you'd lead me to her. Jesse, he said. And here she is, the little killer bride herself. Jesse stepped in front of Evelyn. You've got one chance to walk away, Ridge. You forget who I am? Silas sneered. You're not the only legend out here, Thorne. And I'm thinking, I bring you both in dead, I double the reward. Evelyn raised her pistol, her hand steady, eyes unflinching. Jesse smiled darkly. You really gonna try your luck against both of us? Silas hesitated just long enough. Then everything exploded. Gunfire tore through the canyon loud, close, fast. Dust flew. Hooves screamed. Evelyn fired first. Jesse followed. Silas ducked behind a boulder and returned fire, but Jesse had already moved, closing the gap. A final shot cracked the air, and Silas Ridge collapsed into the creek bed, face down. And bleeding into the dust, silence returned. Evelyn's chest heaved, eyes locked on the man she just helped kill. Jesse walked up beside her. You all right? He asked. She nodded. He would have shot us without blinking. Then it's good you didn't blink either. The message was clear now. They weren't just running anymore. They were fighting back. And together, they were a storm that even the west couldn't contain. The sun rose blood orange over the high plains, casting long shadows as Jesse Thorne buried Silas Ridge beneath a pile of flat stones in the canyon. It wasn't mercy, it was respect for the dead, even the wicked ones. Evelyn stood back, silent, watching her husband work with practiced calm. You didn't have to do that, she murmured. Jesse dusted his hands. He was a bastard, but he died by the gun. That still means something out here. Evelyn looked at the crude grave, then at Jesse's dirt-streaked face. "What does it mean when we've killed 2 lawmen in 2 days?" He looked at her with that steady calm. "It means we live." They broke camp before the sun fully crested the ridgeline. Cal Becker caught up with them by mid-morning riding, hard and looking spooked. "You've got a bigger problem than Silas," he warned. "The marshals are riding for Silver Basin, 3 of them, armed to the teeth." Jesse's jaw clenched. "How far behind? Maybe a day. Maybe less if they push hard." Evelyn looked to Jesse. "We still going?" He didn't even blink. "We've come too far to run. That lawyer in Silver Basin, Mr. Rowley, he's the only man who'll touch a case like yours. If we don't get that letter to him, we'll be running for the rest of our lives." Evelyn nodded. "Then we ride straight through." The journey to Silver Basin wasn't easy. The land turned rough and dry, cracked by old riverbeds and littered with thorny brush. Coyotes circled at night. Heat hammered them by day. Jesse barely slept, always scanning for riders in the distance. Evelyn's hands were raw from the reins, her body bruised from hard days in the saddle, but she never complained, not once. The letter, tucked safely inside Jesse's coat, was their ticket to justice. A signed confession from Sheriff Harker's son, hidden for years, that proved Evelyn acted in self-defense. If a real court saw it, she'd walk free, but only if they lived long enough to deliver a dot. By the time Silver Basin appeared on the horizon, dusk had fallen. The town shimmered like a mirage, wooden buildings, a church steeple, flickering lamps. In the windows, it looked peaceful, but Jesse knew better. "You 2 stay on the edge of town," he told Cal and Evelyn. "I'll go to Rowley alone." Evelyn grabbed his arm. "We go together." "No," Jesse said firmly. "If something goes wrong in there, you run. You don't look back. I didn't marry you to run, Jesse. And I didn't ride through hell just to lose you in the last mile." He growled. Their eyes locked. Neither would back down. Finally, Cal intervened. "I'll stay with her. Go. Fast. If you don't come out in 10 minutes, we come in blazing." Evelyn frowned, but nodded. Jesse rode into town just before dark. He moved like a ghost, black coat trailing behind him, gun at his side, eyes sharp. Townsfolk watched from behind curtains. A few whispered. Some recognized him, but no one stopped him. He dismounted in front of a law office, the sign swinging slightly in the breeze. A. Rowley, attorney-at-law. Inside, an older man looked up from behind a desk cluttered with papers and half-empty bottles of ink. "Can I help?" he started, then froze. "Dear God, Jesse Thorne." Jesse nodded once. "I need 10 minutes. And a pen." He pulled the folded letter from his coat. Rowley took it with trembling fingers, scanned the contents, and his eyes widened. "Is this real?" "It's signed, sealed, and hidden by Sheriff Harker himself." Rowley sat down hard. This changes everything. With this, we can file an injunction. Delay any bounty action. Get her a proper hearing. Maybe even clear her name." Jesse leaned in. "You do it tonight. You send word to every judge between here and Dry Creek. If she hangs, I come back and this town burns." Rowley nodded, pale but focused. "You have my word." Outside town, Evelyn and Cal waited in silence. Then hoofbeats echoed in the distance. 3 riders. Approaching fast. Marshals. Cal swore and drew his rifle. "They're early. We can't let them see Jesse come out," Evelyn said, rising to her feet. "They see you. They'll shoot first. Then they better shoot damn fast." Just as the marshals rode in, Jesse emerged from the law office, cool and steady. The lead marshal spotted him. "Thorne, hands where I can see 'em." Jesse didn't stop walking. "Letter's been filed. My wife's case is under appeal. That don't clear you." "No," Jesse said, stepping right up to the man's saddle. But it means you touch her, you go against the law you swore to serve." The marshal hesitated, and that's when Evelyn stepped out of the shadows, hands raised, chin high. "I'm the one you came for, but we're not running anymore." Jesse stepped beside her. "Because now," he said coldly, "we've got the law on our side." 2 days after Jesse filed the letter with the Silver Basin lawyer, the official order came down from a federal circuit judge. Execution delayed. Immediate retrial required. Defendant Evelyn Thorne to remain in custody of U.S. Marshals pending hearing. It wasn't freedom. Not yet. But it was the crack in the law they needed. Evelyn stood in the dusty street of Silver Basin beside Jesse as the marshals read the document aloud. Her wrists were still red from chains, but her back was straight. She wasn't a prisoner anymore. She was a woman with a name, a husband, and a second chance. Still, one thing was clear: this wasn't over, because Sheriff Reuben Harker wasn't backing down. And if Evelyn wanted real justice, she'd have to go back to the very town that tried to hang her. "Are you sure about this?" Cal asked Jesse as they packed their horses for the ride to Dry Creek. "You got what you wanted. She's safe." "For now." "No," Jesse said. "She's not safe while that bastard walks free." Cal looked to Evelyn, who was tightening her saddle straps. "You agree with this?" Evelyn didn't even look up. "I don't want to run the rest of my life looking over my shoulder. I'm going back. Back to the man who tried to murder you in front of a cheering crowd." "That's exactly why," she replied. "They all saw it. They'll see it again. And this time, they'll see him fall." They rode into Dry Creek at dawn. Jesse, Evelyn, Cal, and the marshals escorting them. No ambush. No posse waiting in the brush. Just the quiet tension of a town trying to pretend it wasn't built on rot. Folks peeked out from behind curtains and saloon doors, stunned to see the woman they thought dead return wearing her outlaw husband's coat and his ring. The gallows still stood in the center of town, untouched, waiting. Evelyn dismounted, staring up at the noose. "I remember how it smelled that day," she said quietly. "Sweat, dust, rope oil." Jesse stepped beside her. "It's not your gallows anymore." "Evia," she nodded slowly. "No, it's his." Sheriff Harker didn't come willingly. He slammed his office door and threatened the marshals with legal codes and fury, but they had the federal order. He was disarmed, cuffed, and brought out into the very square where he once stood with a smirk while Evelyn awaited death. Now the noose loomed behind him. Evelyn didn't smile. She didn't gloat, but she did meet his eyes. "Your son wrote the truth," she said, "and you buried it." "You murdered him," Harker snarled. "You ruined this town." "No," she replied, voice steady. "I just survived you." "That's what burns you most." A federal judge arrived by stagecoach the next day. A hearing was held inside the church, converted to a temporary courtroom. Evelyn testified. So did Jesse. So did Cal. Witnesses from Silver Basin arrived. Rowley presented the letter from Nathan Harker, written just days before his death, confessing to the assault and apologizing to his father. The jury took less than an hour. Not guilty. Applause broke out in the church. Evelyn sat still, hands clasped, tears running silently down her face. Jesse squeezed her hand. "You're free now," he whispered, but she shook her head. "Not yet." Evelyn stood once more before the townsfolk. No longer on trial. No longer in shackles. She looked them all in the eye, every rancher, every widow, every man who had watched her climb the gallows. "I don't need your forgiveness," she said. "I didn't ask for it then, and I won't ask now. But you stood here and let a man twist justice for his own pride. You knew who Harker was. You knew what his son did. The crowd shifted uncomfortably, and still you watched. You watched me walk up there like I was less than a person." Her voice cracked, but she didn't stop. "Well, now I'm your reminder." Every time you pass those gallows, you'll remember what it almost cost to ignore the truth." Then she turned, took Jesse's hand, and walked away not as a victim, but as a survivor, a wife, and a woman who had faced the rope and walked back down again. That night, Jesse and Evelyn made camp on a bluff overlooking Dry Creek one last time. "You sure you're done?" Jesse asked her softly. She nodded. "There's nothing left there for me. Nothing but ghosts." He tilted his hat back. "Then where to next, Mrs. Thorne?" She leaned into his shoulder, staring at the stars. "Somewhere they don't know our names. Somewhere we can start over. Somewhere we're not just wanted, we're welcome." Jesse smiled. "Sounds like paradise." And beneath the open sky, with the past behind them and the west stretched out like a blank canvas, they kissed like they had nowhere to be but in each other's arms. Free. At last. The town of Dry Creek faded behind them like a bad dream that couldn't hurt them anymore. Jesse and Evelyn rode east with no maps, no destination, just a worn trail and a quiet understanding between them. The worst was behind, and everything ahead was theirs to claim. They slept beneath the stars, shared stolen coffee from tin mugs, and made love by firelight. The desert no longer felt like exile, it felt like freedom. Still, the land hadn't forgotten their names, and neither had the law. 3 weeks later, they reached a small valley tucked in the Wyoming Territory, a place so far off the path that no bounty posters had reached it. No one here knew the name Thorne. No one knew about the gallows. No one whispered about outlaws or murdered deputies. Just hills, horses, clean air, and a town of about 30 souls more interested in fences than fugitives. They bought a rundown shack with the gold Jesse had buried years ago. It wasn't much, but it was theirs. A place where Evelyn could plant wildflowers and Jesse could hammer fence posts instead of hammering pistol triggers. It was the kind of quiet they both had nearly forgotten how to live in. One morning, Evelyn came back from the general store with a letter clutched in her hand. She handed it to Jesse without a word. He opened it slowly. From a Rolly. Silver Basin to Mr. and Mrs. Jesse Thorne Ree. Your case and Sheriff Reuben Harker. It was short, but the message was clear. Harker's been stripped of his badge and faces federal charges for obstruction of justice, conspiracy, and evidence tampering. With your testimony, Evelyn, he will never hold authority again. Your record is formally cleared in the territory of Texas and New Mexico. Jesse exhaled that she was free. Fully. Officially. Forever. Evelyn smiled, leaning into his shoulder. Feels strange, doesn't it? What does? Not running, he chuckled. I could get used to it. That night, under a sky bruised purple, with sunset, they sat on their rickety front porch, sipping whiskey and listening to cicadas. Jesse had built her a rocking chair. He pretended it was just for comfort, but she knew better. It was his way of saying, "This is home now." He turned to her, brushing his fingers through her hair. "You ever think about changing your name?" She looked at him, amused. "Back to Evelyn Hart? Yeah, might be safer." She was quiet for a long moment. Then, no. He raised an eyebrow. She turned to him, fierce and soft all at once. "I was Evelyn Hart when I was tried, beaten, nearly hanged. But Evelyn Thorne? That woman survived it. She walked away. She fought back. She made peace with fire and steel." Jesse watched her, awed like he always was. "You sure you want to carry my name?" he asked. She grinned. "It's not just yours anymore. We earned it, together." Months passed. Jesse took odd jobs breaking horses, repairing wagons, helping build a new schoolhouse. Folks began to trust him, even if they didn't know the full story. Evelyn worked in the apothecary and taught a few local girls to read. She kept her pistol hidden, but polished, just in case their past didn't vanish. But it didn't rule them either. They learned how to breathe without flinching, how to sleep without guns beneath their pillows, how to live like people, not fugitives. 1. Evening, as Jessie sat at the table scribbling on the back of a feed ledger, Evelyn walked in quietly, holding something behind her back. "Close your eyes," she said. He did, smirking. "What is it? A second shotgun?" "Better." When he opened his eyes, she placed his hand gently on her belly. It took him a second to realize what she meant. Then he stared at her, wide-eyed. "Evia," she smiled, tears in her eyes. "Guess this little town's going to know the name Thorn after all." He pulled her into his arms, holding her like the world had just given him a second chance at everything. They had come to the edge of the gallows and lived. They had been hunted, hated, hunted again, and they had chosen each other through it. All. Now, they weren't just survivors. They were a family, and the name that once filled wanted posters now filled a cradle, because legends don't die. They grow.